This next interview and discussion is I'm really excited about because I have had the wonderful opportunity to visit and meet with Daniel Lee and the Levi's team, and what they're doing over there is unreal. And so please share as much as you can, hashtag MCON, and putting in your questions at mcon.socialqa.com. So a little introduction for those of you who may not know Daniel. Daniel is the executive director of the Levi Strauss Foundation, which supports pioneering social change in the areas of HIV and AIDS, worker rights and well-being, and social justice in communities touched by the company's business. He serves on the boards of the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy and Funders Concerned About AIDS, and the Advisory Council of Horizons, and also Advancing Justice in Asian Law Caucus. Daniel, thanks for being with us.
A pleasure to be here.
So,
good morning.
And we're sporting some Levi's, right?
Derek and I called each other and we said, we'll wear the same shirt.
Yes, in love, in revolt, and in Levi's.
In Levi's. And doesn't Derek look terrific in his Levi's, may I say?
My mom told him to say that. So, so Daniel, this is interesting. Give us a little bit of your background. How did you get to be the Levi Strauss Foundation head?
Well, I'm not the most likely suspect, I think, to be running a corporate foundation. If I would have looked in the crystal ball growing up, I probably would have said preposterous. The story of who I am and where I came from, and I think since we're talking about identity, it starts before I was born. It's important for me to say I'm a child of immigrants and I'm a child of refugees. Both of my parents grew up in North Korea and fled south just before the war. And it's taken me into my 40s maybe to really fully understand that where I grew up was their third diaspora. They fled from North Korea to Seoul, from Seoul to Philadelphia, and where I grew up was a place called Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So one of the morning speakers was from North Dakota.
We have some Sioux Falls folks here.
Yeah, so I grew up there. We were the second Koreans in the history of the state. Yeah, Live to Tell was my theme song, if those of you remember Madonna. And you know, I went on, like a good Asian American boy living out the stereotypes, I enrolled in the best physics department in the country, got weeded out, my heart wasn't really into it, and I ended up studying religion and religious history. I studied early Christianity, expecting to find these pure kernels of unadulterated truth, and found that there was more diversity than ever. And found myself really drawn to looking at the interplay between people who are called heretics and those who weren't. I learned the Greek roots of the word orthodox means the straight line, whereas for heretic it means choice. Also learned a lot about sort of forces of light and forces of darkness, and looking at these sort of spiritual topographies. And also realized that whenever there was talk about spiritual conflict between forces of light and forces of darkness, invariably there was human conflict between us and them, and a lot of stuff that interplays. I ended up going to divinity school. I didn't get ordained, but I cut my teeth in social movements. They say every 20 years or so you have to start growing up all over again, and I came out as a gay man at age 20 at the height of the HIV/AIDS crisis, and ended up working in the field of LGBT human rights at an organization called the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, working with activists, working on sexual orientation, HIV/AIDS, and gender identity in Asia, and ended up finding my way to the Levi Strauss Foundation because it was a grantee. I knew about the Levi Strauss Foundation because I had heard about its gutsy work as the first organization to respond, the first company as well as the first foundation to respond to HIV and AIDS. It was also a pioneer in the LGBT movement. I knew in 1991 it was the first company to provide domestic partner benefits and other courageous actions. 13 years later, I'm still here.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, social justice, you've been a supporter of MCON and social justice. This is a topic and thing that most corporations would shy away from, but Levi's leans in and does it. Why?
Well, I think it all starts with founders. I studied history, and there's pictures of Levi Strauss himself. And he himself was an immigrant who emigrated from Bavaria, actually escaping religious persecution, in search of a better life in this country. And I think everything that we do in the company really derives from this pioneering spirit that Levi Strauss himself brought. The company that created was one that created the first bonuses for sewing machine operators. Those who were still a privately held company And in the 40s, we started desegregating our factories in the American South long before it was legally mandated. It was all about doing the right thing. And really, I think, I'm not going to break into song like the Hamilton, the anthems, but immigrants get the job done, and it's his spirit, that we seek to give back to the community.
Yeah. So it's interesting because there's some moves that Levi's made and the foundation made right after the election.
Yeah.
And again, this is being a little bit more progressive than probably most brands. Talk about what happened even the day after.
Well, the day after, I myself was verklempt. How many people were a little surprised by the results? Yeah. We at Levi Strauss had a town hall meeting 2 days after the election. And Chip Bergh, our CEO, addressed employees. And I wouldn't know what the heck to have said, but he said unequivocally, this is a moment for us to show our country what it means to live our values. And to show the world what it means to live our values. Our corporate values are originality, empathy, integrity, and courage. And he singled out, in particular, empathy and courage. He also pointed out we're founded by an immigrant who gave back to his community. We're of a city made of immigrants, and pointed out that we've been a company that's always stood for diversity and inclusion. Our foundation, the Levi Strauss Foundation, board met a few days later, and this election was probably one of the most disruptive moments, political moments in our lives, and any disruptive moment, we're really called upon to look at our strategies, our playbook, and ask, do we do more of what we're doing? Does it still make sense? Do we shift course? And we really pressure tested our mission, which is about advancing the human rights and the well-being of underserved people, the most marginalized in places where we do business. And our CEO called upon us to have a special board meeting 3 weeks into the new administration. Our staff met, and we wanted to really act based on, not on conjecture, but based on fact, and literally had sort of a situation room just the first 2 weeks of the administration. And what we realized in talking to our grantee partners is that we saw a bunker mentality among communities that we've long cared about. And when we looked at the executive orders, saw communities that we cared about under threat. And this certainly included immigrants, certain vulnerable immigrants, Muslims, South Asians. We also found in the transgender community a deep need for legal aid as far as a demand for expungements, as well as having identity card confirmations. So when we actually met, our foundation decided it was time to act, and in pressure testing our mission, doing more of that. And we released $1 million to support the civil liberties of groups that were under threat, and that includes certain organizations that support vulnerable immigrants. And we found some organizations that are first movers among the most vulnerable. So United We Dream works with students. The National Domestic Workers Alliance works with domestic workers. And Restaurant Opportunity Centers United works with restaurant workers. And they have very quick delivery systems to get the information needed. We provided grants to organizations like the Committee for American Islamic Relations in San Francisco and the Asian Law Caucus, as well as Pangea Legal Services. We realized that if you have access to legal counsel, you're 5 to 9 times less likely to be deported on a pro forma case. And just as Abdi said, that due process is here for citizens and all alike.
Before we get to some of the questions that are coming in through social Q&A, what advice do you have for companies and brands that when they're looking at Levi's and what you've all done, what advice do you have of them as they go forward in this time?
Well, the reason why we acted was we believe that stigma and discrimination are an affront to our values. So I think, really looking at one's values is not just don't be bad or do the right thing or I'm a good guy, but really interrogating what those values are. Thinking about the communities that you care about and who are you talking to in the community, that's really key. Above all, this is a time, we believe, to make it a statement about America. After all, the Levi's brand is an American icon. And we believe that it was a time to step up. And that for us as an American icon, what we say about America matters. And it's time to take a stand for one that's inclusive, to really stand up for values that embrace all, and nourish all, as opposed to scapegoating and dividing. So it's a time to stand up for America, and I can't think of anything more patriotic than that.
Well, this kind of goes to a values question that came in, which is, what's the biggest challenge to ensuring that you live up to those?
That's a good question. There are moments of truth that come up where I think one is called. I think in the morning we talked about the need to tell one story. What is that urgency of now? In this case, it is a rainy day. The communities that we long cared about, are feeling threats. I think that the voices of corporations in terms of what it means to create an inclusive society are more important than ever. We encourage all our companies to use that voice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's never enough.
So this question is specifically around conditions in your factories. So what are the conditions in the factories, and how do you ensure items are ethically produced?
Yeah. One of the reasons why I came from a human rights organization, and for me it was really important to see how the conditions in our factories were and how, as an apparel producer, Levi Strauss & Company stacks up. Levi's was the first company to adopt a code of conduct back in 1991. And that was at a time when sort of international outsourcing was an inexorable norm. And the company made the decision, to do what's right over what's easy, in having the first company to have a set of standards around labor, social, and environmental standards. That became the code that launched many other codes, even though folks had thought at the outside that we were nuts for doing this. 20 years later, we decided it wasn't enough to just sit on the laurels, and we investigated this whole system of codes and conduct. It's really a system of thou shalt nots. And it's really easy to push down a system of thou shalt nots. But we realized it wasn't doing enough at really getting at the goal of improving the well-being and the lives of apparel workers. So we piloted a new approach called Improving Worker Well-Being that we're actually now requiring all of our suppliers, all of our key suppliers, to survey their workers about well-being needs. And we've created an open source survey around that to roll out programs that are directly meeting these needs. And to build management systems around these so it's not just another one-off initiative. And then finally, to measure the business and social impact. We found that there's actually a $3 to $4 return on investment for every $1 put in women's health programs. Because women in factories all around the world are generally age 18 to 25. Sorry, they're 70% women around age 18 to 25 without a lot of knowledge. They're often migrants to cities of the changes that are happening in their lives or their bodies. And we found that many women were actually skipping work for 3 days during their monthly menstrual cycles. By opening up peer-to-peer education and providing access to sanitary napkins and painkillers, it created the conditions where women were healthier. It actually improved the workplace. And in one factory, it created 615 workdays. So what's good for workers is good for business, and we really believe that's important to socialize in our supply chain.
Great. We got a couple more questions here.
Long answer, sorry.
No. This one I think you're gonna like. Can we see the back of your awesome jacket?
Okay, well. I wasn't really made the model, but this is actually part of the 2017 Pride collection. This is, and what's great to be part of a purpose-driven company, and it's one of the reasons many of our employees are here, is our brands really have a strong stake in LGBT equality. So every year we have a Pride collection. This is actually an image of Harvey Milk. If you look in our stores, this year's Pride collection is about fighting stigma, and encourage you all to check it out. Last year's was an homage to Harvey Milk, and the year before that to Stonewall.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, final comment. Any advice for anybody out there looking in this time and also in social justice?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel that this is a moment where all of us are called upon to use our voices to speak out. This is a rainy day. If you see around you this bunker mentality, and if you don't see it, I encourage folks to go to places where you don't typically frequent. But this is a time for all of us to raise our voices for social justice, for those who are marginalized, for those who are under threat, to put our own voices and our bodies on the line.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Let's give Daniel a round of applause.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.